days of single-shot firearms, the Cutlass was the standard weapon to defend the ship or to take aboard when boarding an enemy vessel. It could be used to hack and chop at the rigging, ropes, and obviously attack enemy sailors. And additionally, weapons such as pikes were used, along with muskets with bayonets, pistols, small axes, and so forth. But today's video will be focusing on the Cutlass, particularly the M1941 boarding Cutlass. Alright, so now we're on to the sword itself. Here we have the US 1941 boarding Cutlass. This model being sometimes called the improved Cutlass because it was an updated version of the 1917 Cutlass. This one being more directly patterned after the Dutch Kluang. The original 1917s had a completely closed basket rather than an open basket. I suppose this made it more lightweight, but in the event that someone was coming at you with another sword, it does leave your hands somewhat exposed. However, at this point in history, the likelihood of you engaging someone with a sword and sword-to-sword combat, boarding a enemy vessel, or repelling boarders from your ship in the 1940s was pretty unlikely. However, U.S. Navy still had these officially on inventory through the late 1940s. I've heard of armorers in the Navy and Marines saying they were still around in arms rooms well past that, and I believe they are still used in ceremonies at the U.S. Navy training schools. So, like I said, pretty lightweight sword, patterned after the Dutch sword. Some of these were actually made under U.S. contract for the Dutch East Indies, but they would never reach the Dutch East Indies because of the war. So this one is an unmarked example. Bakelite grips. Most of the late production ones for the U.S. Navy didn't have any markings, and so nor did some of the Dutch ones. So this one could actually be either or. I believe potentially it was being made for Dutch contract and then picked up by the U.S. Navy since there were ones available that weren't going to make it there with the breakout of the war. Primary usage at this point in history with the U.S. was these were issued to both Army and Marines to use as a machete. The Cutlass by nature is a hacking weapon meant to go aboard the ship, be used in close quarters. Of course, you can stab and slash. In the days of a masted ship, you could hack at the ropes and the rigging. If enemies were throwing hooks over to board the ship, you could chop those. But the thought was, even in this time, is if you were maybe going over in a small boat to board a vessel, this is still a decent close quarters weapon in the event that you expended your last ammunition and needed something to continue to fight the enemy. But in the Pacific theater in World War II, you can see photos of both Army Marines using these in the jungle. And there actually is a story of a Marine using one at Incheon during the Korean War to defend himself. I've tried to dig up verification and more detail on this story during my research on the sword. I can't find a great deal of detail other than it being mentioned several times in stories about the Cutlass. So, like I said, the 1917 sword was the predecessor to this. Still, they were around as well. Only main difference is the closed basket versus the open. And these were then the last swords officially issued in the U.S. military for actual combat use. So, kind of crazy to think about a sword being issued in World War II, but it did have that practical purpose as a machete type weapon. So, just a short video there on the U.S. 1941 boarding Cutlass. And if you have any comments or additional information, if you're a sailor who is more in tune with things with the Navy than an Army guy like me, feel free to put that in the comments, and thanks for watching.
What will we do with the drunken sailor? What will we do with the drunken sailor? What will we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning? Way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises, way hey and up she rises early in the morning.
Shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor, shave his belly with a rusty razor early in the morning.
Way hey.